peace talks. At the same time, there are efforts by some members of the UN Security Council to enforce a resolution to stop bombs by Syrian government forces. Britain's ambassador to the UN said it is important for what he called the indiscriminate bombing to stop because it kills and terrorizes. It's also one of the causes for the flood of refugees from Syria. But Russia has made clear it will oppose any resolution because it believes it will jeopardize diplomatic efforts that have so far failed to end the war. Zena Khuder, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
Hamish de Bretton-Gordon is a former British soldier and a chemical weapons expert. He was on the border between Syria and Turkey just 4 weeks ago, and he's been lobbying in the British Parliament for safe havens and a no-fly zone in Syria. He's joining us here in the studio in Doha. Thanks for being with us on the News Hour. Hamish, so how much support is there in the British Parliament for this idea of creating safe havens?
Well, I think it's growing. I think what is very evident from what we saw at the talks at Vienna over the weekend, that protection of civilians is absolutely crucial. And my feeling from being on the border a few weeks ago is that if we don't do something in the area I know well in northwest Syria, there are over 500,000 refugees. And I got the feeling that they are about to move. After 4 years stuck there in the most desperate conditions, with the weather changing, they're either going right to ISIL or left to Europe. So there is a building view that actually we must do something now, and what we could do, if we can create some sort of safe area, initially in northwest Syria, about 1,500 square kilometres, using naval assets in the Mediterranean, the Free Syrian Army on the ground. I was delighted that the Americans have announced that they're putting special forces into that area. There is a chance that we can create a viable, safe area.
But how would this actually be administered? And would this involve British troops on the ground?
No, absolutely not. I think troops on the ground, the Free Syrian Army, who are very proud, the ones that I met the other week, to have removed Islamic State fighters from that area. There's no immediate Assad forces there. But with naval assets, and they could be British assets in the eastern Mediterranean, using their radar to prevent helicopters dropping barrel bombs in that area and their missiles, that could be policed by there. And US Special Forces on the ground could be aiding the Free Syrian Army and training them to ensure that they provide security from any ingress in there. With that in place, we at the medical charities I work with, OSAM and Syria Relief, we've provided medical support in that area for the last 3 years. With the added security, we believe we could triple that support.
You know, you talk about added security, but a lot of people say that this is just promoting imminent sort of military intervention under a humanitarian pretext.
Well, I don't get with that at all. I mean, it is a very difficult and complex situation, especially now that Russians are in there. If we don't do something, we are going to add to the 4 million refugees who've already left Syria. There are 7 million displaced people in Syria who are at the point of moving in or out at the moment. So if we don't take some action now, I think we're at the tipping point. By creating this area where we in Syria Relief and OSAM have worked well with the security, we can get accommodation in there, we can get food and water to stop the movement of refugees, and ultimately for the Vienna talks, for the P5, for the UN Security Council, to look to some sort of transition for some future for Syria. And if we don't take action now, there will be nothing of Syria left to say.
But if it's the humanitarian motives that are really the main concern here, why doesn't the UK take on more refugees? I mean, the UK is just taking 20,000 refugees up until 2020, and that means 5,000 refugees a year.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a drop in the ocean.
Right.
But all the Syrians that I know in Syria or outside Syria, everybody ultimately wants to go back. Unfortunately, a lot of the refugees we've seen thus far are the fit and the healthy, the well-educated who've managed to get out of Syria. And if we encourage further refugees, and if Britain decides to take even more, then it's perpetuating that and making the chance of a viable Syrian future less likely. So I firmly believe we should work on the humanitarian piece, work on creating areas in Syria where people can be safe and return to, so that there is a viable Syria in future. And I accept it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take months for people to go back to and build a secure future for Syrian, which the vast majority of Syrians want.
You know, you're saying this is an idea that's gaining traction with the British Parliament, but obviously this is not something that the UK can do in isolation. So how much support does this idea have among other coalition members and others involved in Syria right now?
Well, I think there are a lot of people, especially those who've been closely involved, and especially those who have spent a long time in war zones like myself, that realise now that by doing nothing and prevaricating is just making the situation worse. Certainly in the US, General Petraeus and others, and Senator McCain are actively pursuing this to try and get traction within the US. And I think around Europe as well, there is the view that just allowing the refugee crisis in particular to continue and build up is not a long-term option. Now, it's very difficult. There are few options available. What we saw with the safe zones in northern Iraq back in 1991, which I was involved in, saved the Kurdish race and prevented many millions of Kurdish refugees. I think with very few options on the table, this is viable and has the most likely chance of success at the moment. So I'm continuing to lobby, and we are gaining support for this option.
Hamish de Bretton Gordon, we thank you for your time with us on the NewsHour.
Pleasure.
Still to come after the break.